Hi everyone, this is Mrs. McCurry again, and today we're going to talk about ratios. So your book says that a ratio is a comparison of two quantities with regard to magnitude. Now what that means is we're going to be looking at two numbers and comparing how big they are with respect to each other. So let's say we start with 3 and 4. So we have this colon in between. That's normally how we write a ratio, with a colon in between. It can also be written as a fraction, which is why we're studying it in with fractions. And we're just looking at how those numbers compare to each other. Now the way that we compare them depends on what kind of ratio it is. Alright, so there are two types of ratios. There's arithmetical ratios and geometrical ratios. So the difference between the two. Here we have 6 and 2, 6 and 2. We have 6 of these purple arrows and 2 of these green arrows. Alright, now with an arithmetical ratio, the way we would rewrite that, the way we're thinking about that, is really just very simply how many more do we have. So think of it as a 6 minus 2. So these would cancel out and we would get 4. Okay, so it's really just another way of thinking about like a subtraction problem. Now with the geometrical ratio, we're trying to see how many more times, how many more sets we have. So we're looking at it from a division or a multiplication standpoint. So here we have a set of 2, and now we have a set of 2, a set of 2, a set of 2. So we can see there's 3 sets of 2 for every one set of 2. So that changes it from 6 to 2 to 3 to 1. So you can see we're talking about it from the standpoint of division, and that is the kind of ratio we're going to be talking about for the rest of our time. Just as when we're talking about fractions, we have the words numerator and denominator to tell us which number we're talking about. When we are dealing with ratios, we have the words antecedent and consequent to help us know what we're talking about. In a ratio, when they're written in the traditional way with the colon, the antecedent is always going to come first. So in this example, 6 to 2, the 6 is the antecedent, and over here where we have 1 to 4, the 1 is the antecedent. And the consequent is always going to come second, so in our example 6 to 2, the 2 is the consequent. In our example 1 to 4, the 4 is the consequent. Now, as I said before, you can also write them as fractions because we're always talking about geometrical fractions, or geometrical ratios, I'm sorry. So when they are written as with a fraction bar instead of with the colon, the antecedent is just going to be in the place of the numerator up there on top, and the consequent is going to be in the place of the denominator. It's very important when we're talking about ratios that the values that we're comparing have the same label, so that we're talking about 6 days per hour compared to 2 days per hour instead of $6 compared to 2 days. Can't really compare things that are not the same, so you need to make sure those labels match up. So in ratios, there are 3 kinds of ratios. There are ratios of equality, ratios of lesser inequality, and ratios of greater inequality. It's pretty simple to see a ratio of equality, as you're just going to be comparing two numbers that are the same. It is going to be equal all the way across. It doesn't matter what number you have, it is going to be the same. If you were to write it as a fraction, again, you'd have the same number for the numerator and the denominator. Now, in a ratio of lesser inequality, the antecedent is going to be smaller. So we would have things such as 2 to 3, 5 to 7, 123 to 900. And again, it doesn't really matter what the numbers are, it's just important that that first number is going to be smaller, it's going to be lesser. And the opposite is true as we're talking about greater inequalities. That first number is going to be larger. So we would have things such as 4 to 1, 9 to 7, 8,423 to 194. Again, doesn't matter what the numbers are. If we're working on identifying, just looking for which number is bigger. So again, we have the three types. Equality, everything is going to be equal. Lesser inequality, the antecedent is going to be smaller. Greater inequality, the antecedent is going to be larger. So now as we're looking at fractions, any fraction can be written as a ratio, and it's good to be able to identify what kind of ratio. So if we're looking at a proper fraction again is always going to have a smaller numerator than a denominator. So if we're just looking at writing it, we're going to put our numerator as our antecedent, place our colon, and then put our denominator as our consequent. As you can see, our antecedent is smaller than our consequent, so this is going to be a ratio of lesser inequality. Now in an improper fraction, the numerator is larger than the denominator. Again, if we're working on writing it as a ratio, the numerator becomes our antecedent, the denominator becomes our consequent. The antecedent is larger, so it is a ratio of greater inequality. In a simple fraction, in a simple fraction, it doesn't really matter which number is larger or smaller. The focus is just that you're working with integers the entire time. So in this first one, our numerator becomes the antecedent, our denominator becomes the consequent. 9 is larger than 6, so we have a fraction of greater inequality. Hold on. That is supposed to be an I. Or inequality. Sorry. Alright, so now in the second simple fraction, the numerator becomes our antecedent, the denominator becomes our consequent. The antecedent is smaller, so it is of lesser inequality. Now in a mixed number, we have to then convert a mixed number into an improper fraction, which is going to give us an antecedent of 13 and a consequent of 4. The antecedent clearly is larger, so we have greater inequality. Complex and compound fractions, we don't really write as, we can write them as ratios, but we don't worry so much if they have greater inequality or lesser inequality. Just work on writing them. So in this complex fraction, we leave our mixed number. So we have 4 and an 8 to 9. Now if we're really concerned about it, 4 and an 8 is smaller than 9, so it does have lesser inequality. In a compound fraction, it gets a little bit more interesting, because since both our numerator and our denominator are fractions, we're going to write each of those as a ratio. So that is going to give us 6 to 15 of, we're using this comma to signify the of our operation, 1 to 2. That is our discussion of ratios for today. If you have any questions, again, feel free to email me. Don't forget to write any questions you have down, and we will discuss them at our live chat. Hopefully this helps you make sense of what was in the text, and you can go from there. All right, I hope to see you on Thursday.